While the game Spider-Man Miles Morales does hit on major key points on how Miles Morales is a black character in New York City and how he has to deal with that in terms of him being Spider-Man as well, the prequel novel Spider-Man Miles Morales Wings of Fury does hit on a lot of different topics that I think are a lot more darker, a lot more grim, and most importantly, a lot more realistic. And in case you missed it, I did do a full recap of the full book, but these are some elements of the book that didn't pertain to the main plot of the story, and I did want to separate these to talk about it more in depthly. So what is going on, guys? It is your boy TKD 123 here, back in here on PlayStation Source, and we're going to talk about Miles Morales and his run-in with the police. By the way, the link below will be in the description to purchase this book on Amazon if you want to after you watch this video, because I definitely do recommend the book. But going on to the main part here. In the beginning of the story, Miles Morales and his family finally settle into their Abuelita's apartment, and as Genki leaves to go back home to his dorm, Miles goes out to explore his new home in East Harlem. As he's taking in the sights and the sounds of the neighborhood beginning their nightly routines like cooking dinner or relaxing after the day, Miles receives a call from Peter Parker. They have a little chat when Miles is taken off guard by a crash from a nearby store. It's getting robbed and he's about to reach into his backpack to get his suit. However, as he's reaching for his backpack, he notices a little weight difference that is pretty odd for his backpack. Lo and behold, it's Genki's bag. He deduces that Genki must have taken his by accident. Brushing the thought of Genki knowing he's Spider-Man at this very moment, he decides to rush into the store to stop the crime as his late father's words echo in his head. "I'm no superhero, I'm just a guy who doesn't give up." He creeps up to the store when a man about his height wearing a gray sweatshirt dolphin dives out of the window and trips onto the glass covered pavement. Miles' instincts kick in and he tackles the man to the ground as he tries to make a break for it. But before Miles can even comprehend it, the man squirms out of Miles' grip and kicks him in the face. As he's taking off, a shoe jolts his side even harder. "There you are, you worthless thug." An older lady continues to kick and strike with a broom at Miles. "I told you wouldn't get away from me. Think you can just break into my store in my neighborhood and get away with it?" I'm sorry, guys. I tried to do the best the best grandma voice. I'm sorry. Miles tries to explain that he was trying to help and stop the actual burglar who has ran off into the night by now. Red and blue lights begin to fill the space they are taking up outside of the shop. Miles looks at officers that help him and Peter with criminals and feels thankful they came so that they can clear his name, as Spider-Man would never commit a crime like this. However, it hits Miles that he's not in the suit. They have no idea he's the so-called Spider-Man 2.0. To them right now, he's a black teen who has been suspected of breaking into the store behind him by the store's owner. Guns come out, safety's off, and the cops yell out, "Get on the ground, hands in the air, kid." Just like that, Miles is no longer the hero he is with the mask, but just another black kid falsely accused of a crime. The officers hear the old lady's side of the story while informing Miles his time for explaining will come. As Miles sits on the curb handcuffed and afraid he might not be able to sleep in his own bed tonight, but rather a jail cell, a familiar voice rings out, "Hey, you've got the wrong guy, officer," Peter says as he swings into the scene. The cops explain to Spider-Man that he could be wrong due to Miles Morales, quote, fitting the description. He challenges that by directing the officer's attention to the real culprit of the crime hanging by his web about 30 feet in the air. The officers let Miles go, and as Peter and him walk into the night, Miles informs him that Genki had taken his bag instead of his, resulting in him not having his suit ready. As Miles sets off into the night to get his suit back, Peter leaves him with, quote, "Be careful about being in the wrong place at the wrong time." This bothers Miles because as Spider-Man, he was at the right place and the right time. The only difference is that he wasn't wearing his suit, so he's supposed to not help people in need when he's out of the suit, because in doing so, him in plain clothes is going to be resulting with him being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It all confuses Miles and frustrates him to a degree. Peter takes in the criticism and frustration that Miles has and says that he had gotten unlucky with the real criminal looking similar to him. He continues saying that Miles should give the officers a break because Miles was even dressed the same way as the criminal. This further frustrates Miles as he takes Peter's words as him saying that if Miles looked more like Peter out of his suit, it would be the right place at the right time at that point. Gotta go, Miles utters as he takes off to get his suit from Genki, leaving Peter behind. After Miles snuck into his dorm to get his backpack from Genki, he swings into the cold night of New York. Just before he gets home, he stops to sit on a rooftop to muster in the frustration he has with what Peter said. And speak of the devil, Peter arrives to console Miles on the same rooftop. Asking if he's okay, Miles gives a passive yes when Peter points out that people that are okay don't sit on rooftops in the middle of the night. Miles begins to unpack and says that he's frustrated that he's not as good as a Spider-Man as Peter because Peter would never leave his suit unattended, and says, quote, "How can I be one of the good guys when some people look at me and see a villain by default?" Peter, kind of not understanding what he meant by that, says that Spider-Man doesn't look like a villain. How could he be even portrayed as a villain? And he's corrected by Miles saying that people see himself as the person Miles as a villain. Peter pauses and admits he can never relate to that, but does know, quote, how it feels when people judge you before they even know you. He explains how J. Jonah Jameson has constantly tried to pin him as someone making New York City a worse place and causing all these issues when all Peter has ever done was try to protect the city. He continues saying, quote, "Some people care more about the city hemorrhaging money than they do about the safety of its citizens. Those people, that's all they'll ever see us as, expensive. They forget that we're human under these masks and that we're just humans helping other humans." Miles clearly relates to that line. He thinks that if only people knew who he was, knew his heart, knew his intentions, that maybe they would show compassion as opposed to jumping to the assumption that because he's a black teen in New York, he's automatically up to no good. This heartfelt conversation ends by Peter saying, quote, "What you said about being seen as a villain first, I'll never know what that's like in plain clothes, just based on the color of my skin. I don't have any advice for you there, but I can advise you to get to know yourself. Take some time and learn how being Spider-Man will be the same and different for you." Miles admits internally that he's right. Peter can give me all the guidance and teachings on how to be Spider-Man, but he can never teach me how to be a black Spider-Man. That's his path to forge, and he decides that he will figure out his place in New York City with the suit and the color of the skin it rests upon. This takes place in the beginning of the book, and it was the main reasons why I was really glued to this book. I really wanted to see how this arc ended up, and I thought it'd be something that would persist throughout the whole novel, but it is pretty much just contained in this whole dilemma, and it pretty much never gets brought up after this whole dilemma. And there's some times where, you know, Miles will kind of allude to this and kind of call back to this moment, but there's never really anything beyond this point involving this topic. And I think that this is a very bold topic. I think it's a very heavy topic, obviously, and it's something that honestly I can relate to as Kevin, as TKD123, right? And although I didn't love how Peter responded to Miles in the beginning when he was saying that, oh, just give the officers a break, all that good stuff, and it really called back to me personally on some conversations that I've had with my white friends that were ignorant to racism or just didn't really see the racism in what I was trying to explain, in the same way that I don't think that Peter really got the full picture of what Miles was trying to say in the beginning when they first talked right after the whole cop altercation. However, I know that that was the reaction that I think the author wanted me to have and people that look like me wanted to have, to show that Peter, at the end of the day, he is Spider-Man, but he truly is also still a white man that would never relate to the color of my skin and what I go through as an Hispanic, or how other black people that may be watching this video, or any other people of color that may have experienced racism in any shape, form, or fashion, how we might feel. Peter may never know and likely does not have the capacity to know what that feels like, but I appreciated that Peter admitted that he didn't know what that was like and tried to find common ground, how he could closely relate to that with his experiences with J. Jonah Jameson and how the media assumes that he's a menace and bad for New York. I think that was a very smart way for Peter to kind of find a common ground that is obviously not equal, but is a way that they could further relate, and the closest way that Peter could relate to real racism. And in the end of the altercation, overall, I thought it was well done and showed an angle that all of us were kind of thinking about, and I was hoping that they would bring up a lot in the game, but it is a lot more of a, I think, really well way that they did it in the book in terms of trying to lay out this angle that is much easier for Peter to be a hero 24/7, whether he is out of the suit or in the suit. It's much easier for him to be a hero as opposed to Miles, where his skin may have other people having these racist thoughts and beliefs that are at no fault to Miles, no fault to Peter, that are all at the fault of those that keep racism close to their belief system. And I also like how the book lays out that Miles is the first Black Spider-Man. Peter says to Miles himself that you are the first Black Spider-Man, and not every day is going to be easy. There's no course on how to be Black and Spider-Man at the same time. And I think when you couple the novelization of the prequel as well as take the game into account, I think that the game does a really great job at showing Miles' journey and taking up his advice. That Miles has to feel his way on his own and learn the similarities of him being Spider-Man, and also how he has to be a different Spider-Man as well. Miles having to not only know and learn himself, but be himself as well in the suit or out of it. But most importantly, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you guys feel about this whole deal with how they kind of showed the racist things that Miles has to put up with as Spider-Man and as Miles Morales himself in East Harlem? How do you feel about it, especially those that are people of color, those that can relate to this on more of a first account basis? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, make sure to let me know perhaps what your ethnicity is. Are you Dominican? Are you Colombian? Are you Puerto Rican? Are you Black? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure also while you are down there to check out our description where you can find links to our Discord, our Twitter, as well as our Anchor link. That way you can listen to our long form content and podcast format. Those of course being Road to Miles Morales and Road to PS5. Those both have been wrapped up. More Road to series to come in the future. Like the video if you enjoyed it, as well as stay subscribed to PlayStation Source to keep up with the latest and greatest in PlayStation. Thank you all for watching, and as always, greatness awaits.